And now, here we go. So the people that are going to watch this later, they missed our little intro, but we just are recording now. So let's get started. So through monitoring, the monitoring process, we've learned that a lot of recipients have had very common issues. So a lot of issues can be avoided by always having your program guidelines or the application guidelines, checking the website. If there's any sort of policy memo change, those always get sent out. But if you have questions, go to the website first. There's guidelines, forms, and templates at the bottom. Pay attention to effective dates. We don't obviously have a upcoming cycle as of now. We'll see what the legislature does in January. And always, if you come into an issue, you found that some people, like, they don't want to reach out, they don't want to ask us a question. If they come up with something, they just try to figure it out. Always, if there's any sort of question of, like, is this eligible? Is this, going to be in compliance? It's better to ask permission than forgiveness in this case. Have your investment plan handy. So that is your guidebook, your Bible, whatever you want to call it, for your program. So I know it's easy to, you apply for the grant, you get an award, you start your program, and all that stuff just kind of gets put in, the drawer. Always consult your investment plan. If you ever need to amend your investment plan, you're allowed to do that through a process. You contact the department. We go over, what you want to change and why, and then we go through a draft. You take it to your board, get it approved, resubmit that, and then that is your new investment plan. Same thing with your contract. A lot of issues that have come up could have been avoided if people looked at their contract or had that more readily available. And then be aware of program deadlines. So what deadlines? So in middle income workforce housing, there are 3 24-month deadlines, and they can be a little confusing to follow. So the first is 24 months to engage in an eligible activity. From the time that the ACT funds reach your bank account, you have 24 months to engage in initial activity. If you're acting as a developer, it's based off of either like a contract or some sort of expenditure of funds. And if you're doing loans, then it would be when you enter into contract with your loan recipient. So that would trigger, that would be considered an initial activity. Once you start or engage in an initial activity, you have 24 months to allocate the remainder of your funds. So while the contracts are 4 years, you actually might have a tighter timeline than that to expend or allocate all of your funds. So for example, if you get your money in, say, month 2, you have 24 months or 26 months to engage in activity. But if you engage in activity in month 4, then you have 24 months from that point to allocate the remainder. So really only have 28 months, not 48 of the contract. And then 24 months to get projects reasonably ready for occupancy. So same thing, that starts with a contract with, like, a loan recipient. They have 24 months to produce a unit or be reasonably ready. That said, be strategic with your subrecipient contracts. For example, if you have you're entering into a loan contract with a developer that they're going to build 10 houses, if they're not going to have all 10 of those ready or reasonably ready within 24 months, it would be a better idea to kind of separate those out and only get under contract what can be completed in the 24-month timeline. The same goes for infrastructure. Infrastructure is eligible, but if you are starting your infrastructure, then every unit that is going to benefit from that infrastructure improvement or creation, those units have to be ready within 24 months as well. So this kind of came up a little more on the rural side because for like subdivision development, but just make sure that the second you spend an ACT dollar, it needs to yield units within 24 months. And remember, this is a housing program. It's a unit production program, not a land program or a subdivision program.
Okay, so I recognize, especially on the middle income workforce side, that many of you are not doing loans. You're acting as developer on your own, but the same basic principles guide what your files should look like on monitoring as a rural workforce. So just to kind of think through these three sections on loan documents, or again, if you're acting as developer and you are hiring contractors to build homes, it's basically going to be the same. So what are the documents that you're using to secure the funds? Keep in mind that regardless of whether you're making loans or you're paying a subcontractor to do work for your organization, that there needs to be some sort of a contract or agreement, something securing the funds, promissory notes, deeds of trust, etc. Not everybody does it the same way. They're not all going to look the same, but how are you securing the funds and making sure that that contractor or developer is doing what you want them to do? And then second of all, we have had this come up a couple of times with agencies, both in rural and middle income, that homes have not been sold to homeowners. And that is part of the guideline and part of the process is that those homes need to be sold to homeowners. So how is your organization, if you're not the one selling the homes and someone else is doing that, how are you ensuring that they're selling to homeowners and not investors or someone who's buying it for another family member, so on or so forth? Loan servicing documents, make sure that you have copies of permits or an authorization to commence construction, even if that's from your organization, something that gives us a start date for the project and that someone has okayed that project to move forward. And then probably one of the most overlooked parts of the project, again, more so in rural, but occasionally in middle income, is the ongoing inspections and photos. We've seen sometimes where that's where things kind of go off the rails as far as following guidelines and contracts and investment plans, is just not necessarily watching what the contractor is doing and how things are progressing. So make sure you're somehow doing some ongoing inspections and taking photos of the project as you go along. And then making sure when I'm looking through and doing monitoring, if there are any changes, if you're doing any extensions to contracts, change, anything like that need to be approved by whoever the governing board is that makes those decisions and signs the contracts. Loan closing documents, we need a shut-off date at some point, whether it's a final inspection that your agency does. Some communities issue certificates of occupancy and some don't. Maybe it's the final inspection on the city permit, whatever that is, who has authorized that project to be finished and that everything's okay for someone to purchase it and move in. Loan payoff, fee payments, and interest payment information, that should all match your contracts. If there are any changes, there would be an amendment to the contract that would have been approved by the board. Any reconveyances of deeds of trust, make sure that you take completed photos. That's one of the most important things. We want to market the program and show everybody all the good work that all of you are doing. That's, in my opinion, the most fun part of the whole thing. So take some good completed photos for us so we can share that. And then you're being monitored currently on the appraised value, but just for statistical purposes, and sometimes our senators ask about sales dates and listing, cost to construct and listing or sale price. It's just good information for us to have, again, to market the program. So if you can share those with us, I'll be sending out an updated checklist after the webinar here that'll have all that information as well. So you'll have a chance kind of to see that, but if you can give us that information, we always appreciate it. And then again, knowing by which standards your project will be monitored. As we said, currently it's by appraised value, but as you all know, sometimes the legislature changes that. And if there's a policy memo, we will certainly send that out to you and it'll be on the DED site. But again, all that information is beneficial and keeps you covered at monitoring. If we have the information, then you're covered regardless. All right. Project-specific information. This is talking about each individual project as you're going through. Your project activities must match what your investment plan says. So keep that in mind when you're writing your investment plan. If the investment plan needs to be amended to include or exclude some activities, make sure you contact us and talk that through and have an approved amendment by DED and your board. Keep in mind that any qualified activities such as down payment assistance, if you're doing those things, must be used in conjunction with eligible activities. So DPA can be used on a middle income workforce home, but it's not eligible just for someone who comes to you just for DPA as a standalone project. Developer contractor applications and scoring must match your investment plan. So if you say you're going to score each application that comes in, please make sure that you have that available for us to see that you did what you said you were going to do. Make sure that you have board and committee approval for all approved projects and contracts. Obtain developer contractor proof of state and federal registrations. Most of you know, and just about everybody, that's something that's been overlooked fairly regularly. Everybody was kind of in the same boat. So just a reminder to make sure that you are using folks that are registered with the state and with the federal government as contractors. And then agreements or contracts for any developer or contractor receiving middle income workforce housing funds need to include project information. What is the contract funding and where is it going to be accomplished? The amount of the loan or the fee to be paid, the terms of the loan or payment, and then how will it be paid? Everybody's a little bit different. Some just give the money all up front. Some do it in installments at different stages of construction. How's that going to be paid? And then timelines and benchmarks for payment. Guidelines that must be followed per your investment plan and middle income workforce housing fund guidelines. And then one of the things that we're encouraging people, especially those who do loans or those who are not integrally involved in the construction process, one of the other major issues we've seen are contractors that have gone outside of the guidelines, have gone over, we've seen a few that have gone over cost, different things. So we're encouraging folks to have consequences of going outside the investment plan or the guidelines, and how are you going to enforce those if they do that? If someone goes over on cost to construct or whatever else it might be, what are going to be the consequences of doing that, and how are you going to enforce those consequences? And then also the three things from your contract that are required for you to pass on any subcontracts are conflict of interest. We'll talk more about these in just a bit, so I'm just mentioning them now. Conflict of interest, contractor registration, and work eligibility. And then any extensions include board and committee approval, which we talked a little bit about earlier.
So we've gotten a lot more questions on down payment assistance and how that functions within the program. So you might already know this, but I just want to cover it for those who don't or might be interested. So down payment assistance, as Brad said, is an eligible activity in conjunction with a construction project or a rehab. So not a standalone program, but if you can offer down payment assistance to a home buyer who is purchasing a house that was built using middle income. So a couple different differences as far as gaps. So there's an appraisal gap, which is you have to get obviously an appraisal. And if your cost of construction is higher than the appraised value, that's considered the appraisal gap. So that difference between the cost of construction and the appraised value, that is just eaten up by your program. The affordability gap, or some people call it maybe, I'll just explain. So after you get your appraised value, and say you're trying to serve a specific demographic or a specific population, while AMI or income limitations are not part of the program, several people do still enforce some sort of a limit. So this would be the difference between the appraised value and then what you're selling it for. So like an artificial, either setting an artificial sales price for what they can qualify for a mortgage, or offering down payment assistance. So if it appraises for 275 and you would like to sell it for, or you get that mortgage to 250, either you sell it for 250 or you offer $25,000 in down payment assistance. If you offer that down payment assistance, you have the choice then of, do you want to forgive that $25,000 down payment assistance, or do you want to recapture it? We encourage people to do a recapture, so just put a lien on it, or for, due upon sale. So hopefully, we want these people to be in their homes for a long time, but if there is ever a sale, that money comes back to your organization. If you choose forgiveness, we encourage you to do a longer kind of affordability period. So that is that's more language in the trust fund, not middle income, but what you're trying to avoid is people realizing equity that they did not contribute. So if you do, say, a 10-year, forgiveness period, and you do, 1/10 forgiven per year, and they sell in year 5, well, then half of it comes back. But just kind of consider how that is going to be structured in your program if you're interested in pursuing this. This is probably more of a detailed conversation, so if you do have questions, please contact us and we can talk through it. After construction appraised value limit. So as you know, LB 288 that passed this past session reset the limits in the program to appraised value. That's what it started at back in the beginning of the program, and then in 2023 it changed to cost to construct. Well, now it's back to appraised value. So when you're starting a project, you don't necessarily know what the market is going to do. So it's kind of, you have to do your best faith effort to document the appraised value. So when you start a project, get a after construction appraised value of what you're going to build, and then at the end of the project, if that exceeds the limit, document that. I mean, there's just things that we can't account for, and you can't predict the future. But it's more important just to document everything. And as Brad had mentioned, we've had some issues of people going over limit, and there needs to be consequences. So build that into your investment plan, and the penalty has to sting a little bit. So we don't want it to be still profitable to break the rules. So once again, that's kind of a more in-depth conversation. If you choose to have that, please contact us.
All right, now we are going to look at some of the compliance documentation. I know this isn't exciting. I'll try to get through it and save any continued talking for any questions that you might have. So this is from the 2022 contract. The 2024 contracts, after we started monitoring, Nick and I asked for a few things to be added to the contracts, and they are a little bit more defined. Any of you that have a 2022 contract, if you'd like to see the verbiage from the 2024, it basically says the same thing. There's just a few more definitions in there, and I'll kind of show you those. But just a reminder that 411 in your contract states that all provisions in this contract are made binding to any of your subrecipients as well. We see some organizations that literally copy off their contract and they give it to the developer or the contractor so that they have an opportunity to read through it. But just keep in mind that those things are binding on any of the contractors that you use as well. So I would encourage you, if you have not read your contract, it's not difficult reading. Some of the stuff, is legal jargon you probably don't need to know, but there are certainly some things in there that you need to review. Keep in mind that when I sit down to do monitoring, all those standards are going to be devised from your guidelines. They're going to be devised from your investment plan and from your contract with DED, and then any new policy memos or statutes. So if you haven't had a chance to review that, you probably should. This is the 2024 version of that 411 statute. And basically it just says that as a recipient, you might use other organizations, agencies, or entities to carry out eligible activities. That simply means you're a developer and you may hire other people to get some work done. So you are required under the provisions of the contract to make reasonable assurances that those people that you are hiring are going to comply with the requirements of the program as well as your organization. to demonstrate that any of your subcontractors have sufficient experience and the ability and financial capacity to undertake, comply, and manage the eligible activities that they're going to perform on your behalf. And that agency demonstrates familiarity with the requirements of federal, state, and local housing programs, so that they know, basically they know what they're doing with the money that they're going to be using, and they understand that when they're using taxpayer funds, there are stipulations and guidelines that have to be followed. And then 204, contractors and subrecipients. Again, this is section 411 in the 2022 contract. The recipient needs to make sure that you're reviewing each contractor's registration with the following state entities. If they're a developer and they own a corporation, they need to be registered with the Secretary of State. If they are a contractor, even if they are a sole proprietor, they need to be registered with the Nebraska Department of Labor. I can tell you the only time I've ever been stopped, I was building a porch in West Point, Nebraska, and I actually had the Nebraska Department of Labor stop in West Point, Nebraska, and asked to see my Department of Labor contractor's license. Only time it's ever happened, but it did happen once. So they do check, but it is a stipulation by the state that those folks are registered contractors in the state of Nebraska. The recipient, that's you, has to verify to the department that all second-tier contracts, so anyone you're contracting with, are initiated with a entity in good standing with the Nebraska Secretary of State. And they're required to meet all applicable requirements of the Nebraska Contractor Registration Act. And you need to keep proof of those registrations in with their contract and in their file. However you do that at application or on signing of contract, that's up to you. I just need to see that you did it. Number 10, conflicts of interest. This, I would say, also is a spot where we've had a lot of issues over the last couple of years with monitoring. Keeping in mind that no officer, employee, or agent of the recipient will participate in the selection or the award or administration of a contract supported by ACT funds if a conflict of interest, real or perceived, would be involved. And then this stipulation must be included in all other contracts and subcontracts related to projects financed with ACT funds. So where this concerns your contractors and so on down the list is that an agent of the recipient is anyone that's doing work on behalf of the recipient or the state using middle income workforce funds. Contractors, developers, agency employees are agents of your organization and therefore the state. So those folks cannot buy homes. That would be a conflict of interest. Units cannot be specified for employee housing. These are meant to get units on the open market for workforce folks, so they can't be specifically built for employee housing. Units must be sold or utilized on the open market or by the terms of the improved investment plan for income-based programs. So we realize some of you have programs where you have stipulations for folks, they apply, and then they're placed in homes. As long as that's understood, it's part of the investment plan, that's fine. Otherwise, they need to be sold on the open market for anyone that qualifies. Please reach out if you have any questions again before it becomes an issue. Our goal really is to make you successful. If you're successful, we are successful. So I always kind of jokingly say, but it's the truth. We really are the government and we're here to help. We want to make sure that homes are being built, and that starts by us working together. So please reach out. Again, you can copy and paste. We see some folks that copy and paste a conflict of interest verbiage right from their state contract, and that's fine. But I think you also need to make sure people understand what that means. If they don't understand that they are an agent, that they're not allowed to buy it for a family member, they're not allowed to buy it themselves and resell it. We've seen things like that happen. Then those obviously are things we've seen happen. So you might want to explain those things a little bit better. And then verification of work eligibility status for new employees. This is pretty self-explanatory. You are required as an entity using state dollars to use the federal immigration verification system. And then that contractual obligation applies to any and all of your subcontractors. Now, that again does not mean that you guys have to pull work verification on subcontractors that you are hiring, but you are required to, just like we are, to communicate that to your subrecipients, and somewhere they need to sign a document that has that stipulation showing that they understand that as a subcontractor, they are required to use an employment verification system. And then again, just a reminder that a failure to do that, to violate that, is a substantial breach of contract. So the state takes that pretty seriously. So however you do that, make sure you're doing it and that you're communicating that, and we see that you've done that, whether it's in the contract or the application, just somewhere.
Financial management. So you should be having your ACT funds in a separate designated bank account specific to your award. Your matching funds can be in there, but just ensure that it's not just in your general fund. It is just easier to keep track of the ACT funds and your matching funds if they're in their own bank account. So I know this doesn't come up a whole lot, but we have had some issues. So just ensure that is going on. And so while they can be, your ACT and match funds can be in the same bank account, your designated bank account, you still need to account for each of those separately. So using general accounting, generally acceptable accounting principles. There you go. So just make sure that you're keeping track of both of those. Did the project include any other state or federal funding? The answer should be no. And then make sure you're protecting, your down payment assistance or any sort of assistance that's, just follow your investment plan and make sure you have contracts and everything is protected where it should be. Interest earned on ACT and match funds. This has kind of been a little bit of a headache for some people. So ACT funds, if they were sitting in the state treasury, they're going to earn interest. So it's the same way, and they become ACT funds. It's the same way if it's sitting in your bank account. So if the ACT funds are in your bank account, earn interest, then a proportion of that interest, they become ACT funds. So make sure, it's not just looking at the accounting of your ACT funds and matching funds, it's also interest earned on both of them. And just a reminder that ACT funds cannot be used for administrative expenses. You can use your matching funds, but not ACT funds. And then lastly, reporting requirements. Everyone is pretty good about all of this, but remember that we do require an annual audit of your organization for every contract year. Those kind of come in depending on the end of your fiscal year when your accountant gets to it. But just make sure you're actually getting that done and submitting them to us. And then annual reports due February 15th of every year. Once again, people are very good about this, but just keep in mind that the reporting deadline is February 15th, and those will open back up after the first of the year. Last year was the first year we did it in Amplifund. Basically the same process, but it's just an Amplifund, and we will continue doing that going forward. And with that, that is it. We did have a couple, before we open it up for questions, we did have a couple that came through with the registration, so I just wanted to address those. We had a very interesting question come up about assessed values and rehab. So in the program, substantial rehab is eligible, but the cost of the rehab has to exceed 50% of the assessed value of the building. The question was, the assessed value of this old abandoned house is still set at $250,000. It is not worth that, and we got it for $75,000. How do we determine what 50% of the cost needs to be? Is it half of 75,000 or half of the 250? This is a statutory issue. So it says in the statute that it has to go based off of assessed value. But if the assessment is not really in reality, you need to either use an appraisal or if you're working with a realtor, just document some sort of a comp or like how you're determining, what the sales price. If it's donated, then you really should get an appraisal, because if it's donated, you have, it's $0. So you need to have some sort of a starting point to figure out what 50% of your cost needs to be. But yeah, like I said, that is a statutory issue, and that is kind of a difficult problem. And then rent to own. So LB 288 passed, or they included in the act going forward a rent to own option for an eligible activity. Our lawyers determined that the change to the statute was not retroactive. I've read a lot of statutes, but I've not read all of them. And apparently, when something is retroactive, it specifically says that. So I was showing some examples of other things, or other statutes that it does say applies retroactively to all open contracts. This LB 288 did not state that, so it was deemed that it's only going forward. I think that was it. You should all be able to unmute your mic, or you can use the chat feature to ask questions, and the time is yours.
Maybe for Brad, this is Matthew. I have a question about conflict of interest. So in practice, we build a house and we give that statement to everybody, including subcontractors. That means that if that subcontractor's sister wants, the drywaller's sister happens to purchase the house, that's a violation of the conflict of interest.
That's a good question. I'm not sure how far down the line that would need to go. I think
I feel like that's probably pretty far removed.
yeah.
I don't have it, that's not an example of something that has occurred, but as we do try to hire contractors in the community in which we work, that's sort of a reality that it would almost be a feature, not a bug in my mind.
Sure. I think the biggest issue, and I think, in a situation like that, maybe it's something we should talk about on maybe a case by case. I think that the biggest issue is how that is being marketed. If I came to you and asked to do the work, and I specifically had it in the back of my mind that I was gonna use state dollars to build this house, and in the back of my mind I had it set that I was gonna sell it to, my son or my sister, then that's a little bit of a conflict of interest. Obviously, if that person if it's listed on the open market and that person goes through the process and is the most qualified person to buy the home according to your program, that's a tough one. We've not had that one come up.
Now that you mentioned, there was I went to so Habitat Omaha does dedication ceremonies, and I went to one, and the young gentleman that was buying the house, his dad was a painter that was hired as a subcontractor from Habitat. And that's how the son found out about the program, was like, oh, Habitat has this home buyer education, pathway to, home ownership. And he went through the program, and conflict of interest did not enter my mind, because it was just more, he found out about it that way. It was still a competitive, open market process. And I mean, we don't want to exclude, eligible people from accessing a program because a relative gets hired. The conflict of interest is more like those egregious examples of, a board member unduly enriching themselves. Like they have a board member that they want to access the program. Well, that's clearly a conflict of interest. But
I think in that case, if we had a discussion about it and you documented that we had a painter that came in and worked for us, his son or daughter or brother or whoever learned about it through that and was qualified and was a perfect match. I think it's just something we would want to talk about and have documented. It's more that perception, right, of people talking about our agencies building homes and doing things to enrich ourselves. So I can see where some of these would be a little bit hairy and a little bit specific. I think we just need to talk about it and make sure that we're aware of it in that situation. I know that maybe doesn't give you a hard answer, but I realize conflicts of interest can be not black and white. Some are very black and white, and others.
Yeah, I think we can work with that, and that's hopefully is an unlikely situation. But just the last point of clarity, we do need to provide that statement to everybody down to subcontractor level.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Anybody that you are entering into a contract with, you need to provide that statement. There's nothing in statute that says if you hire ABC Drywall and then they hire somebody to do the mudding, there's nothing in statute that says that ABC Drywall needs to provide it in their contract. So when I'm referencing these things, I think the idea is that those things would be communicated down the line, but really we're looking at folks that you are entering into contracts with.
So
that makes sense?
Yeah, and just last question for me, I think the terminology in the contract of sub-recipient, is that what that would mean? Is anybody we are or are?
Yes. Yeah, you are considered the recipient, and then anyone that you contract with is a sub-recipient, correct?
Got it.
So there's a question in the chat from Nate from Nebraska Housing Resource. Were there multiple organizations having the issues with the acquisition rehab? Like I had just mentioned, no, Nate, you're the only one, but it's a very good question. And I think we need to find a solution to it, but it sounds like, yeah, it's a statutory issue. So right now, like we can just do our best to document. If people have other suggestions, I personally really like rehabs and I think we need more of them in this program, but that is definitely an issue. Any other questions?
This is Matthew again. I'll go with one more.
Sure.
Ensuring that they are sold to homeowners. So you talked about if we're not doing the selling and ensuring that, in our case, we are doing the selling pretty directly, sometimes, most of the time, even representing ourselves. So we have a pretty good grasp of who's purchasing the house. Is there something specific you want to see in terms of documentation? Is there a document at closing you want like a disclosure, or is it sufficient to rely on the knowledge that they're getting a residential mortgage?
I think, we've seen, and I'll tell you where this kind of, we have had a couple of incidences, both in rural and middle income, where specifically, one specifically, in both, we've had this happen twice now, where a parent may purchase a home for their child. And while that seems, I'm not going to sit here and argue at all that that's not something that should be allowed. All I'm saying is that is not something that's allowed, and we have to follow the guidelines. And so if I'm going to buy the house, I'm not by guidelines allowed to give it to my child. How that works down the line, is maybe a little bit of a different story, but we've had that happen. We have also had, in the beginning in rural workforce, we've had a couple of contractors who have purchased the homes. I'm assuming probably because they weren't able to build them for the guidelines, and so they purchased the homes for the $325,000 and then turned around and sold it, 2 weeks later for $400,000. And so that's where, we're kind of talking about watching what they're doing, that those contractors, I would say most of the time where we've had issues, it's been contractors selling the homes and the agency not paying attention, or they've been sold for investment properties. So it's more just you doing your due diligence to make sure it's going to an actual homeowner, an owner occupied, housing unit. And even if you're putting something in their contract, whatever that's going to be, so that they know that that's what the expectation is and they agree to that expectation. So I'm not really telling you how you have to do it.
I mean, really, I mean, we don't want it being sold as an investment property. So, and a closing statement is helpful, but I mean, sometimes it's just a name and you don't know what they're necessarily going to do with it. Some organizations do like a certificate, they have to sign something. So even just kind of like the perceived threat kind of that they are, they have to live there is enough. But I think most people understand who it's getting sold to, but just document what you have. We don't want to necessarily say you need this thing, but as long as you can document it, I think we all want the same thing. We want it to go to a homeowner. So however you choose to do that.
We have seen, rather than people redoing their contracts completely, we've seen folks who have just made up a sheet explaining conflict of interest and you sign it, or, just making an addendum or some sort of a sheet that just has that information on there and then somebody signs and dates it.
Any other questions?
Brad and Nick, Steve with Nebraska Housing Resource.
Yeah.
So on the policy memo this summer, 2504, which went back to the eliminating cost of construction, there's a line about the limit applies to any future projects as of the effective date, September 3rd. So we had a situation that the project really began as the whole application for our 24 money, working with a builder that was going to be purchasing lots. It came down to one of the lots of the 5 they were purchasing was still technically, because the floodplain hadn't been recertified after all of the grading, that lot was technically still in the floodplain, so they didn't close on it. We closed on 4 of them. Now there's one more that's after the effective date of September 9th. My question would be, what do you consider future project? In this situation, again, we had full intent of using the funds for a builder purchasing 5 lots to build in Waverly, but
So we
this
would
one wasn't.
So we would go by the contract. So if you entered into a contract prior to the effective date for those numbers of units, we would look at that date. After the effective date, or any contract after the effective date, those would be subject to the appraised value limits. So it would just depend on what was included in that contract and what the date was.
Okay.
Any other questions?
This is Aiden Posey with Front Porch. I had a quick question regarding the $330,000 appraisal limit. Is that something that you recommend builders to get at like an as complete appraisal at the time of construction, or is that an appraisal that has to be completed with the sale of the property? Or how are we able to make sure that if they think they're going to appraise for less than 330, but changes in the market happen by the time it's complete, is there any sort of guarantee or buffer that you guys are recommending?
Yeah, so you want to do, pre-construction, you need to get an appraised value of what you think it's going to be. And then if upon completion, the market is shifted and it is over the limit, you would document it, but no one can predict the future. So I would hope it's not like a $50,000 swing, but if, you know, it's just, once again, like no one can predict the future. So if you document your original after construction appraisal, and then you get one on completion and there's a difference, you documented it.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Well, if not, we will end a few minutes early. If you think of something, please send us an email, call, and we can talk through anything. We will send out these slides and the recording once the recording is ready. It takes a little time to buffer or do its thing. And yeah, we'll be in touch. Thank you all for your work. You do excellent work for our state, and we appreciate what you're doing to further workforce housing. Please advocate for the program. It's important that everyone sees the value of this program and the units that are constructed with it.
And again, we want to just make sure we communicate to you all that we are here to help you. And so don't ever feel like you're wasting our time to give us a call. We were just talking to a couple of ladies that do a lot of good work yesterday, and they run almost every project by us just to make sure everything's going well. And we look forward to hearing from them. So it is absolutely not a bother. Please feel free to call us anytime. We'd rather try to work it through with you in the beginning than try to work through it if there's a problem at the end. So we are here to help.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
You bet.
Thanks, guys.
You bet.